Their mission is simple.
The Taliban and Osama bin Laden picked a fight with us.
By night, by day, across the mountains of Afghanistan,
Be advised, Yankee 35 is en route.
and through its narrow valleys,
You can fly over places that look like the Stone Age.
with a faithful weapon, the Cobra helicopter.
It's a motivator for our troops. You know, when they hear the Cobras coming by.
Keep your eyes open.
Taking risks,
They're squatting down. One of them's got an RPG.
This was the first time that I had been in the Cobra in a firefight with bullets going both ways.
tonight, on the hunt with Task Force Red Dog.
From ABC News. This is Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
This is a war story and a love story and a recruiting poster all wrapped into one. Everything we told you last week about the brutal, dehumanizing, depressive qualities of war is likely to be washed away this evening in this video sonnet to an attack helicopter and the Marines who fly it. For 6 months, filmmaker Richard McKenzie and cameraman William Skinner were embedded with the U.S. Marine Corps Reserve Helicopter Squadron. Its official designation is HMLA 773. Its infinitely more colorful radio call sign is Red Dog. Even though it's a reserve unit, most of its members served full-time in the Marines and then enlisted as reserves after they retired. The squadron was activated late last year to serve in Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. The Red Dogs are still there, but what McKenzie and Skinner are going to show you tonight is the story of their first 6 months at war. This film is a co-production between Nightline and the Discovery Network. On January 10th, Discovery will be launching its new military channel. The Discovery film, Task Force Red Dog, will launch that channel. Here, though, is our take on the story. It's part of what veteran war correspondent Chris Hedges and I were talking about on Nightline last Friday. It's the intoxicating side of war. It's difficult to watch those Super Cobra attack helicopters and the latest version of the Huey helicopter gunships without your pulse beginning to beat just a little faster. Back home in Georgia and Louisiana, they fly for companies such as Delta and Federal Express. But the Marines of Task Force Red Dog have been called to active duty in Afghanistan, and their lives have changed.
I started thinking about the military probably about halfway through college. Flying had been something that I'd always kind of been around. My dad flew a little bit.
Oh, ever since I was little, all I wanted to do was be a pilot. I was active duty for about 11 years, almost to the date. Reason getting out, when you start hitting this rank, they wanted me to go do a Pentagon tour or go to a group or things like that, and I just want to continue flying.
I turned the TV on, I watched the second airplane hit the towers, and I knew that our world was about to change.
I remember coming home that night and sitting down with my family and knowing, being in the reserves and knowing what was going on, that I sit down with Laura Lynn and the boys and said, okay, things are about to change. There's a possibility that I'm going to get activated and I'm going to have to leave here very soon.
Once a Marine, always a Marine. The Taliban and Osama bin Laden picked a fight with us. And if we just tuck tail and run, we are inviting every other terrorist throughout the world to do the exact same thing that he did and get away with it.
The Cobra is pretty much the loudest helicopter around. That two-bladed sound is unmistakable.
Let's go to the runway. We'll wait for the seal. Roger. Watch the truck coming in. Inside.
I know from the experience of what I have in the Cobra, the 3,000 hours or so that I have flying this airplane, that there's not a piece of ordnance out there that we can't carry, and there's really not a job out there that the Cobra can't do one way, fashion, or form.
It's a motivator for our troops. You know, when they hear the Cobras coming by, and they know, okay, we got some fire support.
It's been proven in the Gulf War, and once again in Iraq, and also here in Afghanistan, and same thing in Somalia, is that the aircraft is very versatile. It's easy to deploy.
It's so flexible in the amount of ordnance you can do, the amount of fuel, the altitudes, the temperatures, the conditions in the environment that airplane can fly in.
Be advised, Yankee 35 is en route for a single CH for BCP-3.
Every time I get in it, I have a big smile on my face.
Roger, Yankee. Ice, repeat ice. You've got 2 snakes working targets.
As a Cobra pilot, when you're flying overhead and you are looking for bad people, it is unbelievably difficult for us to decide who's good and who's bad.
Yeah, Roger.
You have thousands of people walking around with weapons, and you have no idea if they're Taliban or if they're just some farmer walking around protecting his crops.
It's about 3 clicks north of Oklahoma.
I would say 80% of the people in this country, just from what I've seen, are carrying some type of weapon.
They're squatting down. One of them's got an RPG in the
I refer to it, if the United States or the average American sees this, you can look back in the wild, wild west that you all read about.
We've heard there may be a PKM out there also. We're getting shaky information from our AMS. Yeah, Roger. They kind of look to to us, but stand by.
It's completely legal in this country to walk around with a weapon.
Go down the ridge line where it takes a second dip. There's a big bush.
They look up at you and wave. You suspect that they're good guys. If they don't look at you, I wish we could just land and shake them down.
Copy. We got our eyes on him. Looks like he's got a truck on the backside as well. It's stopping people talking to him. Stand by. We're gonna see. We're gonna take a little pass and see if we can get them to do anything. Roger.
When I first started flying over Afghanistan, I was like really taken aback because you can fly over places that look like the Stone Age. They're just mud huts, and they could have been in the 16th century.
These people live back 1,000 years in time. I'm flying over something that's thousands of years old, and they're still doing it the same way by hand, day in and day out. Where do they get their water? How do they grow their food? You know, there's no 7-Eleven down at the end of the corner where they can get their gas or buy their bread. And every day you see them as you're flying around. You see people scavenging for wood or walking around the hills and just wondering, their whole day is just spent in trying to gather things to survive.
Be advised, in about 3 or 4 miles up this water, you're going to run into a truck stop. And we got trucks all across the road right now. It's blocked up. We'll let you know whether it's going to be clear or not.
Along the alternate route, they're setting up a covert ambush. And so what they're going to do is recon one day, set up the block the next day, ambush the third day.
It all begins with the daily intelligence briefing.
So hopefully they'll be able to basically either shoot a lot of people or deny them the ability to access in and out of Afghanistan.
The only thing that they respect is absolute force. And the military response is pretty much the only thing that we're left with for some of these guys.
You've got 3 of them.
Going through it and killing everybody in the town, tactically, that doesn't make any sense. Do you get the bad guys? Sure. But morally, what you're doing is you're teaching that you no longer care anything about any life or any of the people here.
We're going to be down here in Cows.
But things don't always go according to plan.
Some special ops guys, a unit that was out, called in via SATCOM, satellite communications, that they were getting shot at, and they were in an ambush, and they were requesting close air support.
Once we got overhead, the guys on the ground directed us to an area where they were ambushed. So we started scanning the hills, and I was flying at the time. David was looking out, and he saw 4 suspects with AK-47s.
In the Marines, all assets, including the Red Dog's Cobras, have one salient mission: to support individual troops on the ground.
Basically, I relayed over the radio that the 4 individuals were now egressing the area, and the low passes we were doing weren't going to keep them from going over the ridge line and possibly getting away from the special forces. They requested if we knew of any lift assets in the area.
You know, we don't have any lift assets for you. The only thing we could do is maybe throw down the ammo bay door of the aircraft, which is held together by hinges and 2 big, large cables, so it will support the weight.
Come down here and land. Let's do it. Let's do this emergency extraction.
The Special Forces guys wanted for us to lift them and intercept these guys that are getting away from them.
He and I quickly went through some numbers and kind of in our head and tried to figure out exactly, could this happen? I mean, with the amount of weight that we were about to put on the aircraft.
David and I discussed, you know, the possibilities, the ramifications of the tight terrain that we had to land in.
And I had one of those cold shots of urine that you get, you know, you're just like, I cannot believe I just got volunteered to do something that in the Marine Corps had never been done before.
We knew what we needed to do to conduct this thing safely. And so we made a nice, smooth approach into the River Wadi.
We were going down into an area where basically if anybody wanted to take a pop shot at us, we had to depend on somebody else.
Lifting somebody or putting somebody on the ammo bay doors is something is an emergency procedure. We as Cobra pilots are familiar with it, but you wouldn't go out and actually train to it.
I jumped out of the front seat of the Cobra with the straps and grabbed 2 Special Forces guys, opened the ammo bay, and basically put them on the ammo bay. And they were kind of looking at me with big eyes because I don't think they recognized exactly what they had just gotten themselves into until they sat down on this ammo bay, and I took a strap and put it across their waist, and I cinched it down.
David strapped the 2 Special Forces guys, gave them a quick instruction, made sure they were set tight.
I'll get you on the ground very quickly. You're not going anywhere. You're strapped to the aircraft even if the ammo bay breaks.
I had the advantage of being able to look at the Special Forces guys, so if there was going to be any trouble, if they were slipping or for some reason, you know, something wasn't going right, I could immediately communicate that to David.
We flew around, came to the top of a ridge line that was pretty tight, and I came to about a 1-foot hover, and Bullet basically motioned those guys to jump off the aircraft. They jumped off, and we went back and we did this 2 more times. So it was a total of 6 guys that I transported. The special ops guys ended up capturing 5 guys. They found some weapons, and they also found some bloody rags where they had returned fire and found the ambush site where they were originally engaged from.
That made us feel good because we actually did something, and we got some bad guys that day.
It has to be one of the coolest things I ever did. It really does, because I didn't recognize exactly how big the deal was to the special ops guys until the next day. And these guys are based at a different camp. And they came over to the camp that we're at, so they specifically made a decision to come over and find us. And they brought us some goodies to thank us. They brought us a bunch of pictures. And all they could talk about was, you guys basically did whatever it took to get the mission done, which is what it takes over here to get these bad guys. You understand that there are certain rules, and you didn't do anything that the aircraft wasn't capable of doing, but you did do stuff outside the rules to try to make something happen to allow us, again, to get the bad guys so their family and my family and everybody else 2 or 3 generations down the line are still not coming over here.
When we come back, the Cobra pilots engage the enemy.
They actually weren't scared of the helicopters. They fought regardless because their ambush was there and they're going to execute.
Playboy Savage, say again, please.
March by tracer fire.
Copy.
The pilots and crews of Task Force Red Dog practice day and night. They use the latest night vision and laser technology to pinpoint targets and operate around the clock. The unit serves as a type of airborne 911 for infantry troops on the ground. The call they got for New Year's Eve seemed routine.
It was a beautiful day. And, you know, it was just another mission, just another day. So, I mean, you just don't think about what's going to happen.
On December 31st, we were tasked with a convoy escort for Bravo Company, 1st of the 87th, and it was going to be based out of Orkney. Convoy escort was a mission that we'd done several times to this point. We had a good rapport with that particular unit.
We got called on this mission to go cover a convoy coming back through one of the passes, and it was just a routine mission.
They wanted us to recon the area around them. As usual, they want us to secure their perimeter as they consolidate their troops. When they're all in one area, they're a juicy target.
I think there was 10 trucks, roughly 10 to 13 vehicles. They were stopped north of the area where they thought they were going to get ambushed.
And this is an area that had been an ambush site in the past.
But the lead vehicle now is down about maybe a click and a half all the way down to the town.
The only other thing that was unusual was a car coming through one of the wadis with the flashing lights coming towards the village.
And at that particular time is when they basically did a coordinated ambush.
We still think that could have been some signal.
They all opened up at the same time.
No sooner than the car get back, you know, a little further away from the village, the convoy, which was halted at this time, came under fire.
The first indications that I had that the convoy was being fired upon was seeing red tracers flying in front of the aircraft, generally from the ground at a 45-degree angle up towards the sky.
And then at that time, we got from the ground guy, from the forward air controller, clearing us to fire and saying something to the effect that everything in the hills is enemy, kill it.
We started suppressing the fire where we were seeing it coming from. At this point, the convoy was somewhat buttoned down, and the comms that we would have normally expected weren't coming.
Once they opened up, then we basically just saw the enemy tracers and opened up on them. Opened up on the enemy tracers, and the guys on the ground were firing back in certain positions as well.
As soon as I saw that, I nosed the Cobra over to get the tracer origination site and the gun sights and started to fire at the enemy.
It was a classic ambush site, and it was set up classically, where, you know, they cut the head of the convoy off.
I really was in disbelief that they would try to engage the United States while we were right over top of them.
They actually weren't scared of the helicopters. They fought regardless, because their ambush was there and they're going to execute.
This was the first time that I had been in the Cobra in a firefight with bullets going both ways.
Making the X'd out eyes.
It was the first time that I had seen hostile aggression from an enemy force while I was flying the Cobra.
Yeah, this is the first time the Marine Corps Reserve helicopter light attack squadron has had confirmed kills in combat.
Good guys over here are dying and putting themselves in harm's way every day, and bad guys are dying and putting themselves in harm every day.
They're not to be taken lightly. They're fighting for a cause, and they're pretty smart at it.
There's no quick fixes in the world. We're going to win, and people need to recognize that it's just going to take us a long time to do it, because the enemy is not stupid. If they were, this would have been over a long time ago.
I'll have a closing thought in a moment. In Vietnam, 37 years ago, I learned to love the Huey helicopter. To this day, I still salivate when I hear that familiar thwack, thwack, thwack of a Huey overhead. It delivered food and water to us when we were out in the field with U.S. soldiers and Marines. They flew us into combat, and often at great risk to the pilots, they got us out again when they came to pick up the dead and wounded, and reporters were allowed to hitch a ride. I never felt more alive than to be sitting on the floor of a Huey with my feet dangling out the open door, the hot, sticky atmosphere of Vietnam cooling as we went to altitude. Yes, often as not, there were dead men in the body bags right behind me. That is the hideous part of war. You can love it and hate it at the same time. That's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.